My name is Jonathan Graves, and what I'm about to recount is a horror story I lived through a few years ago when I inherited an old house from my great-aunt, Margaret. The house was located in an isolated region of New England, surrounded by dense forests and eerie hills. I had always heard stories about the house but never took them seriously. Until that summer. I arrived at the property on a cloudy afternoon. The Victorian house stood imposing and frightening. The garden was overgrown with weeds, and the windows looked like dark eyes watching me. With the heavy key in hand, I opened the creaking door and was greeted by a smell of mold and decay. In the first few days, I explored the rooms, trying to get used to the environment. There was a feeling of sadness embedded in the walls, as if the house held dark secrets. On the third night, I heard footsteps upstairs. I slowly went up, armed with a flashlight, but found no one. Just an inexplicable cold. While rummaging through the attic, I found an old trunk full of Margaret's personal belongings. Among them was a diary. The pages were yellowed with time, and the shaky handwriting revealed a disturbed mind. Margaret wrote about voices whispering at night and shadows moving through the hallways. One night, while rereading Margaret's diary, I saw a figure at the foot of the stairs. It was a woman dressed in white, with long black hair covering her face. As I approached, she vanished like smoke. A chill ran down my spine, and I knew something was very wrong. Exploring the basement, I found a hidden room behind a false wall. Inside, there were strange symbols drawn on the floor and walls, and melted candles in a circle. It was evident that some kind of ritual had been performed there. I remembered the stories I heard about Margaret being an occultist. The voices began to torment me at night. Incomprehensible murmurs that seemed to come from all directions. I tried to ignore them, but each night they grew louder and more threatening. It seemed that the house itself was alive, breathing and watching my every move. One morning, I saw a child in the garden. A blonde girl wearing old-fashioned clothes. She looked at me with empty eyes before disappearing into the mist. Margaret mentioned in her diary a child who had tragically died in the house. Could it be her? In the second-floor hallway, there was a large antique mirror. One night, as I passed by it, I saw something terrifying. My reflection did not mimic me. Instead, it smiled sinisterly and waved at me. I smashed the mirror in a panic, but the reflection continued to haunt me in my dreams. I decided to investigate the house's history further and went to the local cemetery. There, I found Margaret's grave and those of several others who had lived in the house. I discovered that they all died in tragic and inexplicable ways. It seemed the house was cursed and attracted misfortune to its inhabitants. Talking to the oldest residents of the town, I learned that the house originally belonged to the Whitley family, known for their occult practices and macabre rituals. It was said that the house was built on cursed land, and the spirits of the Whitleys still roamed the hallways. One night, I decided to try contacting the spirits. I set up a Ouija board and began asking questions. The answers came quickly and clearly, spelling out words like death, suffering, and revenge. The window burst open, and I felt a dark presence watching me. In one of Margaret's bedroom drawers, I found an amulet. A silver cross with ancient inscriptions. Wearing it, the voices ceased for a while, and the feeling of dread diminished. I felt that the amulet had some protective power, but I knew it wouldn't be enough to save me completely. Reading more about protection against spirits, I discovered that a circle of salt could keep entities at bay. I drew a circle around my bed, and that night, I slept undisturbed. But the feeling of being watched never completely disappeared. I began to find dead animals around the house. Crows, cats, and even a deer, all without visible wounds. It was as if they had been drained of their life by some invisible force. Local superstitions said this was a sign of a demonic presence. Desperate, I sought the help of a local priest known for dealing with paranormal activities. He agreed to visit the house and perform an exorcism. When he arrived, his expression changed instantly. He said he had never felt such a strong and malevolent presence before. The exorcism was a terrifying event. The priest began to pray, spreading holy water throughout the house. The walls shook, and agonizing screams echoed through the hallways. An invisible force tried to attack him, but the amulet and his prayers seemed to keep it at bay. When he finished, he looked exhausted but relieved. The exorcism, the house was strangely quiet. The voices ceased, and the apparitions stopped. I finally managed to sleep an entire night without interruptions. However, a feeling of unease persisted. It was as if the house was just waiting for the right moment to strike again. One night, I woke up feeling watched. When I opened my eyes, I saw a man standing at the foot of my bed. His face was shrouded in shadows, but his eyes glowed with deep hatred. He vanished before I could react, but the impression of immediate danger remained. I began to have recurring nightmares. I dreamed of Margaret being chased by shadows and laughing insanely while performing dark rituals. I woke up in a cold sweat, and the house seemed darker and more oppressive each day. Terror was beginning to take over my mind, and I knew I needed to find a definitive solution. I decided to investigate more about the Whitley family and the house. I visited the town's historical archive and found old documents describing the horrors that occurred in the house. Summoning rituals, human sacrifices, and pacts with dark entities. It was evident that the house was rooted in evil. The voices returned, louder and more aggressive than ever. They called my name, demanding that I perform the rituals left by Margaret. The house seemed to pulse with dark energy, and the shadows on the walls seemed to move on their own. The amulet was no longer enough to protect me. I found a letter written by Margaret shortly before her death. In it, she admitted to making a pact with an entity in exchange for power and knowledge but deeply regretted it. She warned any future resident of the house to destroy the altar in the basement to break the curse cycle. I decided to follow Margaret's advice. I knew that destroying the altar might be my only chance to escape that hellish house. But I also knew that the entity would not let this happen easily. I prepared for the final confrontation, armed with the amulet, holy water, and desperate determination. I descended into the basement the next night. The air was heavy, and the sense of a malevolent presence was almost tangible. I began to destroy the altar, using a hammer and reciting prayers I had learned. The walls shook, and the entity manifested, trying to stop me. I felt its cold hands grabbing me, but I persisted. With one final blow, the altar crumbled. A sharp scream echoed through the house, and the malevolent presence vanished. The air felt lighter, and the sense of imminent danger evaporated. I knew I had succeeded, but I had also paid a high price. The physical and emotional scars of that night would follow me forever. I decided to sell the house and move as far away as possible. I found a buyer willing to restore the house, unconcerned with its dark history. Before leaving, I buried the amulet in the garden, hoping it could protect future residents from any remnants of evil. I moved to a distant town and tried to start over. But the memories of that house haunted me. I woke up in the middle of the night with the sound of the voices still echoing in my mind. I knew that although I had physically escaped, part of me would always be trapped in that place. A few years later, I received a letter from the new owner of the house. He mentioned strange events and asked if I had experienced anything similar. I hesitated before responding but decided to tell the truth. I didn't want someone else to go through the same hell I did. The new owner decided to perform another exorcism and take measures to protect the house. I was relieved but also knew that the house's darkness would never fully disappear. Margaret's house, with its secrets and horrors, would continue to be a grim reminder that some doors should never be opened. I often think about that house and the events I lived through. It became an indelible part of my story. Maybe, in some way, I was chosen to face that evil and bring some form of redemption to the tormented spirits there. But I also know I was just a piece in a much larger game. Even in my new house, I sometimes feel a presence watching me. Maybe it's just paranoia, but it feels like a part of the darkness followed me. I try to live my life normally, but I will never forget the horrors I witnessed. Margaret's house left a mark that will never completely fade. I leave this story as a warning. To those who venture into haunted places, remember that some stories are not just tales to scare children. There are things in this world that defy understanding and logic, and it is not always possible to escape unscathed after encountering them. One morning, I received a call from a paranormal investigator. He was interested in the house's story and wanted to interview me. I hesitated but eventually agreed. Talking about what happened seemed to help exorcise, at least a little, the internal demons I carried. The investigator, named Peter, was a serious and dedicated man. During the interview, I shared every detail, from the first night to the final confrontation. He listened attentively, jotting down every word. He said my story was one of the most intense he had ever heard and that he intended to help protect the house and its future inhabitants. Peter decided to make a documentary about the house to warn others about the hidden dangers in cursed places. I agreed to participate, hoping my experience could prevent others from making the same mistake. Revisiting the story was painful but also cathartic. Peter spent weeks investigating the house's history and interviewing other town residents. He discovered paranormal events dating back to the 19th century. The Whitley curse seemed to be deeper and older than anyone had imagined. During his research, Peter found a connection between my family and the Whitleys. He discovered that Margaret was a direct descendant of the Whitleys, which explained her connection to the house. This also meant that I, in some way, was destined to face that evil. Peter suggested a final purification ritual to try to rid the house of any remaining curse. He summoned occult and religious experts to perform the ritual. Although I was reluctant to return to the house, I decided to participate, seeking a definitive closure. Returning to the house was a surreal experience. It felt both familiar and strange. The memories came back with full force, and I felt a mix of fear and determination. The ritual was performed on a full moon night, with chants, incense, and prayers. During the ritual, the malevolent presence manifested again, stronger than ever. It seemed determined not to be exorcised. But with the combined strength of the experts and my own prayers, we managed to weaken it. Finally, an absolute silence took over the house, and I felt a lightness in the air I had never felt before. I left the house for the last time with a feeling of relief and sadness. I knew that, in some way, I had helped free the souls trapped there. But I also knew I could never forget what I experienced. Margaret's house had changed me forever. Peter's documentary was a success, warning many people about the dangers of the occult and cursed houses. I received numerous messages of support and gratitude from people who had experienced similar things. Although my story was terrifying, it also served as a warning and a reminder. With time, I managed to find some peace. I returned to work and rebuilt my life. I met new people and tried to move forward. But the scars of the past were always there, reminding me of what I faced and what I overcame. Peter continued to investigate paranormal cases and kept me informed of his findings. We became close friends, united by the shared experience. His dedication to the study of the supernatural inspired me to continue helping others facing similar problems. I discovered a renewed interest in spirituality and began studying more about spiritual protection and purification rituals. I wanted to understand better what I faced and how to prevent others from experiencing the same. It was a way to turn my trauma into something positive. A new family moved into the house, now protected by various spiritual measures. I kept in touch with them, always ready to help if something strange happened. So far, the house seemed to be at peace, and the new family reported no significant paranormal event. My horror story became more than a personal account. It became a warning, a case study, and a source of learning. I realized that, although I had faced evil, I had also found an inner strength I never knew I possessed. Today, looking back, I see that my experience with the haunted house was a journey of self-discovery and growth. I learned about human fragility and resilience, and the importance of facing our fears, no matter how terrible they are. I leave this account as a warning and a hope. May those who read it learn from my experience and protect themselves from the forces they do not understand. And that, even in the darkest situations, they find the strength to fight and overcome. Margaret's house may have been a nightmare, but it was also a catalyst for a new, stronger, and more aware life.